Welcome. This is James Corbett of The Corbett Report.
And this is James Evan Pilato from Media Monarchy, and we welcome you to the 140th episode of The New World Next Week, which, of course, you can find all the information at newworldnextweek.com. James, I know this may sound hard to believe, but there are other stories in the world that don't have to do with guns, and we'll do those right here for you today. We'll begin, I think, James, with a story that not only has it been a huge push in the comments section on our YouTube videos for New World Next Week, but I think you've had people asking you about this story, and I know on my end I've had people asking me about this story, and that is about the Idle No More actions going on in Canada. This is a story, if you're unfamiliar with it, there's a lot to learn. So I'll actually just kind of give you a quick little Wikipedia truncation just to kind of let you know and kind of set the stage. And then we'll go into some of the latest from the Globe and Mail and some other websites around the world. Idle No More is an ongoing protest movement originating among the Aboriginal peoples in Canada, comprising of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and much more. It's consisted of a number of political actions worldwide, inspired in part by the hunger strike of Chief Teresa Spence, and further coordinated and fueled by social media. It's a reaction to the alleged abuses of Indigenous treaty rights by the current federal government, and the movement takes particular issue with the recent omnibus bill, that's Bill C-45. And James, you probably have a few words about that. The latest that we have on this story, on these now days of action, will take from theglobeandmail.com. First Nations groups launch blockades and protests in Idle No More Day of Action. Protests prompted by First Nations frustration with the federal government flared in at least 6 provinces Wednesday. That's today, January 16th, as I come to you. The day of action began quietly, but by lunchtime, police in Windsor blocked one of 2 access roads to the Ambassador Bridge, which is a major trade crossing from southern Ontario to the United States, as protesters massed. A spokesman said the closing should not last long, and natives were soon moving to a nearby parking lot. A CN Rail spokesman confirmed that protesters had blocked the main line in Manitoba. A small group of people identified themselves as members of the American Indian movement were photographed blocking the CN Rail line in Manitoba. Some members of AIM, a militant group involved in the 1973 standoff at Wounded Knee, do not recognize the U.S.-Canada border. So, needless to say, there's a lot going on here. We'll include in the show notes other headlines from Press TV. Native rights protest draws thousands in Canada, and even more. So, James, your take on this story, please.
Well, this is, as you say, I think coming off of the back of things like Bill C-45, the Omnibus Bill, and some of the specific changes that are being proposed or are on the table to the Navigable Waters Act and other things like that. But I think it's something that's starting to transcend all of these specific things that caused the initial movement, and is becoming sort of a more general movement trying to draw attention to and change the way that the federal government is handling its treaty obligations and things like that. So whatever one thinks about the politics of it, at the very least, I think we can take a look at it as a phenomenon, and we can say that it is certainly, well, more productive than a lot of the other types of internet protests that go on, where people just sort of leave their 2 cents on a comment form somewhere and believe they've contributed something to humanity. I mean, at least these people are out on the streets, they're doing something. This is what political action has always looked like in the past, and this is generally how things get done. So whatever one thinks of the politics of it, and I certainly do support a lot of the things that they're calling for, but whatever one thinks of the politics, at the least they're doing something about it. And I think a lot of people can take notes of what's going on here if you are genuinely concerned about some of the things that are happening, whether your thing is gun control or whatever it is. I mean, this is how you actually, I don't want to say reason with or argue with the government, because government is just force, and of course, as people will know, I'm an anarchist at heart, so I have absolutely no trunk for the government at all. I don't believe they should exist. But I mean, as long as they're dealing with that kind of reality, this is at least one way of doing it, and they're using flash mobs and social media and all of this to their advantage, and I think that's to their credit. They know what they're doing, they know how they're doing it, and they're definitely getting some results. So it is interesting to watch this unfold. We'll see how the government takes care of it. But interestingly enough, the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, have basically said to the Superior Court in Ontario, yes, we're doing what we can to sort of handle these protests, but we're not going to go in there with guys to break these protests up and to try to, potentially hurt someone or have our guys hurt for this. What happens between the natives and the federal government is the federal government's business, and we're not going to go in and step in and do that. So it goes to show when people stand up, the government or the government's goons will often back down because they don't want any part of it. So again, it's just another surprising thing that can happen when people actually stand up for their rights and try to do something about it instead of just commenting on it.
You even just kind of make me think that's even the classic kind of bully scenario. Once you stand up to that bully in school, you'll find, oh, wow, they stopped picking on me. That's a gross understatement of this story, and I didn't do it justice. So again, we'll implore folks to always go check out the links and the source notes to go, find out for themselves. James, our second story is a different one, but it still concerns who owns what, essentially, as we see the term ground war being used. This would be the French campaign in Mali escalating into a ground war. The latest I was able to grab from The Telegraph. France's campaign in Mali has escalated into a ground war when troops fought to prevent al-Qaeda and its allies from striking deep inside territory previously under government control. After 6 days of raids, French special forces were fighting alongside the National Army near the town of Diabalé, 220 miles northeast of the capital of Mali, Bamako. That's Bamako. Meanwhile, James, I remember some of the earliest headlines I saw when this story broke, and it, of course, was flying pretty low under the radar here in the States, but I was seeing headlines saying U.S. support French airstrikes into Mali. Now, fortunately, our fearless military leader, Leon Panetta, has said the United States is not considering sending ground troops to Mali to work with French forces that began an assault on militant Islamist rebels in the country last Friday. But during a visit to Portugal, he said the U.S. military would help the French in other ways. Panetta commended France for sending troops to try to prevent al-Qaeda's North African affiliate from establishing a base of operations in Mali. But he indicated there is a limit to the help the United States will provide, saying, quote, "There is no consideration of putting any American boots on the ground at this time," end quote, Panetta said. On this past Monday, January 14th, on his way to Portugal, Secretary Panetta said U.S. forces would help with intelligence, logistics, and air transport, but officials say discussions are continuing with France on exactly what U.S. forces will do. Now, James, I'm fairly certain we on New World Next Week have discussed this dreaded North African affiliate of al-Qaeda, right?
We probably have somewhere in the archives, but just as an even newer update, just coming across the wires right now, apparently Militants seize Americans and other hostages in Algeria. And apparently now Panetta is saying that the United States might take military action in response to this. So we're seeing some very interesting things happening in that region right now. And it looks like America may indeed be putting troops on the ground in the near future there. And lo and behold, once again, AFRICOM finds a way. Interestingly enough, people might remember back years ago when Joe Rogan did a stand-up bit about Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and how it was basically like Cobra Commander, and he did a great bit of talking about some of the absurdities of this propaganda campaign that was in existence about Al-Qaeda back then. Well, I was just listening to his most recent podcast with Opie from Opie and Anthony, and he was reading one of these articles about this Mali thing, and he was exactly right. It does sound so ridiculous when one just starts to read some of the propaganda that they're putting out about this. So there's one up on Yahoo News called "Al-Qaeda carves out country in Mali, prepares to defend it," that starts out by saying, "Deep inside caves, in remote desert bases, in the escarpments and cliff faces of northern Mali, Islamist extremist fighters have been burrowing into the earth, erecting a formidable set of defenses to protect what has essentially become Al-Qaeda's new country." And it does go to show the flowery rhetoric that they're trying to use to sell this particular intervention. Again, it's pretty ridiculous. The question being, if this isn't really about getting Al-Qaeda, which of course we know is just that convenient chess piece that they move into any part of the chessboard that they want to take over, then what is this about? And you can find out more about that from an article on Global Research right now called The War on Mali, What You Should Know, an Eldorado of Uranium, Gold, Petroleum, Strategic Minerals. And it goes and breaks down some of the strategic and very important resources that are in Mali right now that are on the table in this intervention. And lo and behold, surprise, surprise, it just happens to be a very resource-rich country that that they've been looking to exploit for the last few decades. And now they have a very, very good reason to go in there and take things over. So once again, where there's a will, there's a way. And I think we're about to find that out in Mali specifically.
So, James, I was just now taking some notes there, and we'll add in some of those extra updates into the show notes. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that when we did cover the North African Al-Qaeda affiliate, I want to say that we were covering the fact that, of course, they're funded and trained by the same multinational military and money interests that fund and train and create all kinds of enemies all around the world, which, sidebar, I'll just throw in the mention, James, the big Portland tree bomber trial has kicked off here. So, of course, we're going to find that it's another case of the feds funding and training and creating something so that they can then seize on it later and say, look, we're doing our job. But let's brush all that aside for now and do a positive third and final story this week on New World Next Week, and we'll take it from my own foodworldorder.com. Orlando works on code change for controversial vegetable garden, which those three words together are just the height of ridiculousness. The city of Orlando says it's trying to work with the couple whose front yard vegetable garden has sparked controversy nationwide by passing new regulations that would require changes to their garden, a move that would affect several others in College Park in Orlando, Florida. So in November, Local 6 first reported the story about the controversial garden after the city told the Helvingstons their 25 by 25-foot garden was not in compliance with the city's code. The city had asked the couple to uproot it because it was against the landscaping code that requires permanent maintained ground cover with a finished appearance. That's permanent maintained ground cover with a finished appearance. So, James, this story goes on with the city threatening the couple and the back and the forth. Ultimately, if we jump down to the bottom, it says that if this proposal passes, the city said it won't cite anyone for not complying for at least 6 months. The Helvingstons said they don't agree with the proposal and plan to fight it, saying the size and setback requirements will make it impossible to maintain a healthy front yard garden, which I would say is probably the intent all along, is that it makes it impossible. I got a couple of flashback stories, James, that also kind of deal with urban food controversies on Food World Order, city officials waging war on gardens, and the huge rooftop farms going up in Brooklyn, James.
Controversial vegetable gardens, indeed. It sounds like something Al-Qaeda would do, trying to grow vegetables in your front yard. How dare they? To me, the point of this, the win in this, the fact that it's a good thing, is not down to what the city ultimately does or does not do to change their ordinances. To me, it's the sort of game changer in terms of people's mentality about this issue, and the fact that people are aware of this as an issue, I think, is important. I think people have to stop thinking of these things in terms of what's the government going to do? Are they going to allow me to do it? I think people just have to do things like this, and the chips will fall where they may. And I think there is a sea change going on in terms of people's perceptions of this type of issue, of growing vegetables, the need to do that. I don't think anyone really is questioning that in today's economic environment, and people are, I think, gradually shifting over to this new mentality, and that's reflected in the city governments backing down on their ridiculous ordinances, etc. And I think that's what we're looking to see more and more in the future. I think people have to act as free human beings, and the government will follow them, because they're just a bunch of spineless jellyfish that will go with the tide on most things. And so that's to me the ultimate solution here. It's not, again, to look to government, which shouldn't exist. It's to be free human beings, to act in that manner. And I think that society will follow in your wake if you take bold and decisive actions.
Couldn't have said it better myself, man. I appreciate it so much.
Okay, then I guess that about wraps it up for this week. Anything going on your side?
On the Ground Zero side, we are going to dive into some of the gun executive actions, because ultimately it's not so much about the gun grabbing. It's going to be about all the sort of mental health screening and the tie-ins with Obamacare and essentially the medical surveillance state. It's not going to be so much about guns. On the more show busy side, we actually have a couple of the stars of a new series which premieres on Sci-Fi tonight, a show called Ghost Mine that's actually set in Oregon. So we're having an event and we're going to have some of those guys in studio. So that'll be kind of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the Corbett Report, people might know I recently launched an occasional podcast series called Questions for Corbett, asking me questions. Well, next Monday we're going to launch another new occasional podcast series. And again, I will keep my lips sealed on what it is, but you'll see on Monday. So stay tuned to CorbettReport.com for that. James, once again, thank you for 3 great stories. I'm looking forward to next week.
Thanks so much, man. Take care.